at least always, is that the great success for Florida gets more and more into the past with each passing year, that it just starts to feel like ancient history. For as much as they gave Georgia grief for the 40-plus years for all the times they did, the honest truth is that the current recruits have no memory of Florida being good. If they cared about college football as a child, they are still almost too young to remember Florida being really competitive really at all. And we're on all the other platforms now, so welcome into Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. So this is not just Gator hater telling Georgia fans what they want to hear. This is just an absolute fact, is that Florida's great run of success is ancient history right now. And redefining themselves for a contemporary audience is kind of the mission there for that program, and it is not easy for Billy Napier or for anybody else. William Perry checks in and certainly happy about all those dogs in places like Green Bay and Philadelphia. You see that with his line there. That's great. Hemingway on the subject of the college football playoff scarf being tech colors. As we've said before, that's as close as they'll get to a college football playoff anytime soon. Hassan says if Eric Gilbert can block, look out. Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm very excited about his upcoming season. We talked about this yesterday, that if you're thinking about who some of those breakout stars could be for UGA, if you're going to have a great season, you have to have them. Who could they be? Obviously, there is a portion of me that still wants to go slow with Gilbert because that's what we've been asked to do by people who know about him and care about him. But I can only go so long without hyping something up. Like after a while, I'm just going to sort of, shake out of my clothes here and just start, hyping things to the moon. And so Gilbert seems like a pretty good thing to hype to the moon right now. So I was very happy with him this spring for sure. Somebody asked the question about Stetson Bennett. Scott Harris says, is there any quarterback in college football with more experience than Stetson? Of the top programs, who has that level of experience? I guess he's probably got, more starts than Bryce Young does? He does, right? Yeah. Does he have – yeah, so, Bennett's going to be right there. I'm trying to think who else of the top contenders has anybody close. How many games has Dylan Gabriel played? Yeah, that's kind of an interesting comparison. Does Bennett have more starts than any of the somewhat reasonable list of contenders for the upcoming season? That's actually a pretty interesting question. I'm trying to think of anybody who would have more. I'm not easily succeeding because he's played more than Spencer Rattler has, right? Has he? Yeah, it's an interesting comparison. I'll have to get my pad and pen out on that. But, yeah, I would say he's pretty close to being the most experienced quarterback of certainly the contending teams anyway. Brad Hotton says, Kirby said that Eric Gilbert missed a couple of assignments on G-Day but did really well in spring practice, still working on conditioning. He had to have some adrenaline pumping. Yeah, and I've said this a million times. A guy that maybe is a little bit out of shape but has a nose for the football, I'll take that any day of the week over a guy who looks like Adonis but's not out there making plays. Because, in a strength and conditioning program, and especially a nutrition program, being around the team officially every single day, Georgia can transform your body just like that. Whatever conditioning issue may have existed for Gilbert during the spring, and I think even over the course of the spring that got better, but whatever conditioning issue would have existed for him then, I think will long be in the past by the time July, August, September rolls around. And it's the ability to make plays that matters. Some guys just look great but don't quite have that. But with Gilbert, you certainly see that he does. Tom, on the subject of UGA basketball, yeah, at some point in time this week, I do want to get into that just a little bit. Obviously, we'll never do a ton of basketball because that's not really what people want. But it certainly seems like Mike White's making some real hay on the recruiting trail. And I do think that's worth paying attention to. I think Tom's right about that. Hassan says he thinks that Kendall Milton will benefit most from the tight ends. I think Milton and all the running backs have a tendency to benefit from that. When you send these tight ends in motion, or when these tight ends are kind of that dual threat of, are they going to be receivers or are they going to be blockers? That is a very tough thing for a defense to deal with. We talk a lot about putting a defense in conflict. I think if you want to go back and look at what I believe is the most frustrating year from the Kirby Smart era, for me, that was 2019. This was just not an offense that functioned very well. And I thought there was a lot of talent. There were multiple first-round picks along the offensive line, a dynamic running back in DeAndre Swift. But this was a really frustrating team to watch in 2019. I just have to be honest. Listen, y'all know I love Georgia, and luckily I'm in a position where it's very easy to kind of come on here and do a pretty positive show most days because the fact of the matter is Georgia has a lot of good news. It's not hard to find something good to talk about because Georgia has a lot of good things going on. But that doesn't mean that everything that ever happens around UGA is just perfect and rosy. I thought 2019 was a pretty miserable season. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't think Georgia was very fun to watch. And that's frustrating. But when you and I think the main reason why that was true for me at the time was, and we'll get ready to start the regular show in a moment, but the main reason why that was true is defenses just weren't put in conflict when facing Georgia. Most of the time, defenses knew what was coming. They were stacking the box to stop the run, and they were daring Georgia to do something about that. And, Georgia just wasn't punishing defenses for playing them in kind of a one-dimensional way. And it got to be really, really frustrating over the course of that year. Dramatic transformation takes place, though, when Todd Monken arrives. 2020 wasn't a great season for Georgia. Georgia didn't win the East. But to my eyes, the brand of football that Georgia was playing that year was far better. That Georgia was clearly an improved offensive team, playing an exclusively SEC schedule plus the top 10 ranked opponent in the bowl game. Georgia scored more points per game in 2020 than it had scored in 2019, even though you had Murray State and Georgia Tech and Arkansas State and teams like that to pick on. Georgia still scored more points per game in 2020 because I believe that Todd Monken was putting defenses in greater conflict, forcing them to make a choice of, do you think they're going this way? Do you think they're going that way? Do you think they're running? Do you think they're passing? And that put defenses in a position where they were frequently guessing wrong. Even better in 2021, obviously the results speak for themselves. And now when you look ahead to 2022, it's the presence of all those tight ends. We're going to talk tight end on the show today here a little bit. But it's the presence of all those tight ends that I think force defense to make a decision. I'm not an X's and O's guy, but I do read X's and O's guys. A lot of these folks will talk about the NFL. The teams that have the most creative offenses in the NFL, the teams that have the most success, oftentimes have multiple tight ends in the field, and they're throwing out of those sets. This is not, let's put 3 tight ends in the game and then run student body left and student body right. Sometimes it will be running the football. Tight ends help with that, but other times it's using them as dynamic pass-catching weapons, and defenses are left guessing the entire time. So I think you're absolutely right about that. Tom says Amarius Mims all in now, believe that he is. Hemingway says this offensive line has some promise, could be the best in years, could be true there as well. Tom, also on the subject of the Diamond Dogs earning a season sweep over Kennesaw State. Hassan says, how long do we keep Monken? I'd say the fact that you have him coming back for year 3 is probably better than you could have hoped for having. So from that standpoint, I've enjoyed this 3rd year, and let's see what happens after that. So with all that said, we got to get going. Oh, boy, it's late. All right, so here's what we're going to do today. Funny video of Kirby Smart. For those of you watching on video, you'll get to see that. That's always good times. I'm going to have a pretty interesting discussion with Mike on what truly are reasonable expectations for Georgia for the upcoming year. What counts as a success? What would count as something less than that? There is potential change afoot, at least the rumblings and grumblings. We'll see if this actually materializes into something when it comes to name, image, likeness. We'll talk about that, if that's actually going to add up to something. Off the top of the program, though, we have seen Kirby accomplish a lot. But what's next? What's the final boss in the video game? What's the next frontier for Kirby Smart? I think it's actually pretty obvious, and I think if you're a thinking man or a betting man, the odds are Kirby Smart will do just as well with this as he has every other challenge so far at UGA. What do you say we begin with that right there? It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
As we've been saying, it has been quite a time to be a dog. Georgia has won the national championship. Georgia has dominated the NFL draft, and it's just been kind of fun to bask in all of that. And yet, at a certain point in time, you do have to turn the page. At a certain point in time, you do have to kind of wonder what's next for UGA. One of the things we talked about on yesterday's show was if you want to be back in contention for the national championship again in 2022, much the same way we said this a lot leading into 2021. Some of you are still nice enough to bring this up to me on social media. We said this a lot last year, that you've got to cultivate that elite level of draft talent. You have to have that about half dozen or so guys that can be first-round picks, either in the upcoming year or some future year, if you want to be in the national championship conversation. And if you have less than that, then you are less than as a team. You are probably not a true national championship contender if you can't look on your roster, if you can't look on your field and see 6 guys at least who have the look of a future first-round draft pick in the NFL. You just probably don't have what it takes to win the national championship. Now, this past year for Georgia, they had 5, all of them on defense. What we've said is that, well, if you look ahead to 2022, the makeup of this is probably a little bit different. We had the anonymous coach quoted by ESPN from the SEC who says when he looks at the Georgia defense next season, he sees maybe 3 or 4 pros. It may be a little less than the 5 and 6 that you may have seen from this past year's team, first-round type players. But Georgia was still amongst the most, probably the most talented defense in the country, probably the largest collection of high-end talent there and all of that. And we said yesterday, okay, well, that means, Jalen Carter is the safest, sure thing bet on that. Keely Ringo probably next. Maybe you get Nolan Smith after that. But one way or another, that if you're going to have like a half dozen or so first-round type guys on next year's team, that some of that's going to need to be offensively for Georgia next season. That's where you have to start looking for some of those candidates. And we said yesterday that it becomes easy to identify a couple of offensive linemen for whom that could be true. Broderick Jones may be the easiest of all. Warren McClendon after that because of what he's been doing. You know, Cedric Von Prawn as part of that conversation after that. But then at that point in time, you also start bringing some of the playmakers into this discussion. Now, Brock Bowers next year won't be draft eligible, but eventually the assumption is obviously he'll be a first-round pick just given the level of success that he enjoyed as a freshman. But for next year's team, who else could that be? We talked a little bit yesterday about Arik Gilbert, and when Connor Riley was a guest on our show yesterday, we talked about some of the other wide receivers who might emerge there in that category. But if Georgia's going to be, from a talent perspective, on par with traditional recent national champions, then some of the elite talent that's going to emerge in 2022, it just seems destined that some of that's going to be on the offensive side. Now, I realize that when we say that, it kind of opens up a little bit of a hot topic among Georgia fans, because even as Georgia was on its way towards winning the national championship this past season, there's an element of some UGA fans. And listen, why this is true, I guess, is open for debate. But there's an element of some UGA fans who are kind of left to wonder, okay, well, it's great that Georgia's dominated on defense, but when are they going to dominate on offense? When are they going to open up that part of the success of the program? When is Georgia going to be as good defensively as it is offensively? Now, part of the frustration for me on that topic is that I think it ignores the fact that statistically Georgia was pretty dominant offensively last year, averaged about 40 points per game for the season. There are very few instances last season where the Georgia offense didn't show up and give Georgia everything it needed to win the game that it was playing. This was a very good year, I would say even great year for Georgia offensively a year ago. But admittedly, the Georgia offense did lag behind the defense a bit. And admittedly, while Georgia was probably one of the 5 best offenses in college football last season, there were a couple of teams that were better. And in the Smart era, there have been a couple of teams each year that have been more explosive than Georgia offensively. So in a lot of ways, this topic about the Georgia offense kind of represents the final frontier for Kirby Smart. Smart's shown you he can win a national championship at Georgia. I believe he'll be in line for more in the future. He's shown you that he can put 15 guys in the NFL draft and 5 of the guys in the first round. He's shown you he can do that. But the final frontier for Georgia is to produce the same level of draft success and the same level of offensive success to match what this program has consistently done on defense, including last year when it might have been the best defense in modern college football history. It's at least in the discussion for that. Now, to Kirby Smart's credit, he has talked openly about this a lot, that there are big goals that Georgia has offensively, and there are expectations that Smart has on that side of the ball that are just as lofty as what he expects from his defense, even though Smart's kind of that defensive-minded head coach. That's his background prior to being a head coach. His ambitions on offense are no smaller than they are on defense. In fact, you want to go into the end of the season a year ago and talking about what he wanted to see from the offense, maybe why the offense kind of looked the way that it did at times last year, and talking about the overall playing personality of it. Smart hasn't shied away from talking about this pretty openly. Let me give you an example from late last season as a way of keeping our conversation going right now.
I think we've got good players on offense, and I think Mike is doing a tremendous job of using their skill set I still don't know if we're as open as we would love to be. We've had injuries at wideout. We've had to do it some different ways. I mean, the huge difference in our offense is the production we've been able to have in terms of explosive plays, use of tight ends who are talented. Let's be honest, insert Brock Bowers and insert Darnell Washington. You've increased the talent level at that position. We're using the backs. I feel like we've used the backs well before, and we've got a good group of wideouts. I think Coach Monken's done a tremendous job of using our personnel where we may not be as big on the offensive line as we've been in the past. But I do think playing good offense is important to your success. You can't be one-sided and expect to be successful.
So I think that's a very well-worded statement from Smart, and it's candid, it's direct, it's somewhat blunt. I think Smart gives you a pretty good assessment of what Georgia is and maybe what it still wants to be offensively there, and really doesn't shy away from that. I think a different way to phrase basically what Smart says there is that over the course of the last couple of seasons with Todd Monken as offensive coordinator, Georgia has taken big strides forward in each of those years. And now you look at 2022, where I believe Georgia could be in line for another big step forward offensively. And some of the NFL draft names we're talking about next spring could be playmakers on that Georgia offense because of just the overall capabilities of the UGA offense. But even with that said, Georgia up to this point in time has not yet been what Alabama has been offensively, where you're not only explosive, you're led by an elite top-end type quarterback, what Ohio State typically has been, where you kind of have that elite top-end first-round type quarterback leading an offense that's scoring, 42, 45 points per game. Georgia to this point in time has been somewhat less than that. So in a lot of ways, the dominant quarterback, the dominant passing attack to match the level of dominance at every other position group is the final frontier at the University of Georgia. So let me say this right now. Now, maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't, but here's where all this is leading for me. As you look ahead to the future, and by future, I don't just mean 2022, I mean the next few years. Based on how Kirby Smart has handled every challenge he's faced thus far at UGA, do you really believe that Georgia will stop short of eventually having this too? I think the safe money is that eventually Georgia will have a quarterback just as good as every other position group on this team. Now, how soon does that happen? I don't know. But given the fact that Georgia has gone out in the span of time since Kirby Smart has been here in 2016 and gone from, what Georgia was before, which was a very good program, to now the national champion and 15 guys drafted, given the speed with which that Kirby has conquered college football, this final frontier that he's yet to conquer, I think the safe money is that he'll eventually conquer that too. And if you're paying attention to what's happening at UGA, first of all, I saw this the other day. Tuscaloosa News had a story on this. So if you want to go back to 2017, that's Smart's second year, Georgia came just short of winning the national championship. But do you realize that the Alabama team that beat Georgia that year just set a record over the course of the weekend for the most players ever drafted off one team? There was a Tuscaloosa News story about that. That's the kind of team it took to prevent Georgia from winning a second national championship in the Kirby Smart era. It speaks to how successful Smart has been as quickly as he has been. And when you've lined up that level of success, one right after the other, the last kind of, on video I said a moment ago, kind of the final boss of that video game, the last, mountain to climb, the last, foe to vanquish, thing to be conquered, putting together the elite quarterback, putting together the elite top-flight offense, the way that Smart described there a moment ago. I think the safe money becomes that Georgia is very likely to do that there as well. Now, it could be that Georgia does that with a quarterback currently on the roster. Obviously, Stetson Bennett, comes back with a lot of expectations for him for the upcoming season after what he did a year ago. But there's also plenty of intrigue about some of the younger quarterbacks who eventually will get their chance to show what they're all about there as well. There are no shortage of fans here of this program who believe that Carson Beck could one day be the kind of great quarterback that eventually I believe Kirby Smart will have. Or maybe Brock Vandagriff is that guy. A lot of Georgia fans think he could be. Or maybe Gunnar Stockton could be that guy. A lot of folks think he could be. Or maybe it's a quarterback who's not yet on the roster. Have you considered this for a moment? The more we get into the discussion of the 2023 recruiting class, the more I believe it's starting to seem somewhat apparent that Arch Manning's coming to Georgia. Now, listen, I'm not a recruiting analyst. I don't do crystal balls, whatever the name of the online predictions are. I don't do those. Not sure mine would be worth very much. But I do remember back when Justin Fields was a recruit. And yes, I know that's a little bit of a hot button name still for some Georgia fans. But when Fields was a recruit, I remember when it was that I realized that Fields was coming to Georgia. The moment I realized Fields was coming to Georgia was the moment I looked around and realized he's definitely not going here. 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 At a certain point, there was really nowhere left for him to go but Georgia. It wasn't that Georgia won. It was that everybody else was eliminated. Georgia was the only one left. It's like a battle royal almost. And with the Arch Manning recruitment, I'm starting to kind of feel the same way. Like at one point in time, I thought the legacy program, Ole Miss, might be involved in this recruitment. We don't really see much evidence of that being true at all. National analysts told us not too long ago that new coaches Brian Kelly at LSU or Billy Napier at Florida, they were going to try to get into the Arch Manning recruitment. But if that's ever going to happen, it hasn't really materialized yet. Like we really have been kind of stuck here for a while with what is kind of thought to be the big three in the Manning recruitment. It's Georgia, it's Alabama, it's Texas. Well, have you seen what's going on for those of you that follow the recruiting stuff closely as of late? Alabama right now seems pretty interested in Eli Holstein, another quarterback from the 2023 class. They seem to be paying a lot of attention to him. Holstein seems to be paying a lot of attention back towards the Crimson Tide. Based on that circumstantial evidence, it almost seems like Alabama, I don't want to say waving the white flag of surrender, that'd be making too strong of a statement. But they are certainly looking at a contingency plan pretty closely that does not include Arch Manning. If that's true, it just kind of leaves Georgia and Texas. Well, as many of you have said to me on social media, and I don't think you're wrong about this, if it really is a Georgia versus Texas comparison for Manning, where's he going to go? The school that had 15 players drafted or the school that had 0 players drafted? Many of you know the Longhorns didn't have a single player taken in the most recent NFL draft. I don't ask that question rhetorically. I mean that literally. Is Manning going to go to a school that didn't have a single player drafted? I'd suggest not. I've also told you that for a guy like Manning, who for the most part sidesteps all of the recruiting drama, Texas just has way too much of that. It's just too dramatic of a program, too much of a soap opera in Austin, week in, week out, seemingly, for a guy like Arch Manning. I think it's very easy to imagine that Arch Manning's not going to go to Texas, which pretty much only leaves Georgia there at that point in time. And that, if it ends up being true, only reinforces what I said a moment ago. That for Kirby Smart, who's done everything else, he's won a national championship, he's dominated NFL draft, he's built Georgia into a consistent winner. He has made this a great program. This may even be currently the best program in all of college football. There's really only one more frontier to conquer. It's having a quarterback who's as good as the other players at the other positions. And eventually, I think it's a pretty safe bet that Georgia's going to have that too. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Breda Pest Management. We are happy to have you with us here today. No matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We get going at 9:45 for our first and 15 on DawgNation.com and the DawgNation app. And, of course, we're happy to have you there. Radio as well on Athens Sports Radio 960F. Podcast, Apple, Spotify. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. It's been so much fun this week to kind of be back in the saddle again after a great DawgNation cruise. But, man, it's so much fun to be back doing all of this again the way we like doing it. And we really appreciate our friends at Breda Pest Management for making all of this possible. We love Breda Pest Management. They're the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. It means they're taking care of Sanford Stadium. They're taking care of Foley Field, the equestrian complex. And they are the ones we trust here at DawgNation there as well. And my encouragement to you is this. If you hear us talking about Breda Pest Management and you're wondering, what's the story there? Here is the story with Breda Pest Management. If you switch your pest control provider to Breda Pest Management, you can save money instantly just by making that decision. Right now, we're all thinking about what can we do to put a little extra money in our pocket? What can we do to save a few dollars? That's as important now as it's probably ever been in my lifetime. Well, making the decision to switch to Breda Pest Management is going to give you money back. You're going to save instantly just by doing that. And I love the folks there, what they do. I love the way they take care of you. They certainly do that. They're famous for that. Been doing that since 1975. Got 100 plus people kind of handling you on all that kind of stuff. But what matters right now more than anything else is more money in your pocket when you make that decision to trust them with your pest service, with your termites. They're going to do all of that for you. So check them out online. It's bredapest.com. That's the website, bredapest.com. Here's how you spell it. BREDA. bredapest.com. They're going to take care of you. They're going to put money back in your pocket. Trust them the way that DawgNation does for your pest control services, and they are going to handle you on that. And boy, oh boy, important to save money right now. Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics, helping you do just that. All right, we're going to get Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment. And actually, there's a pretty interesting conversation I want to get into with Mike, because I think this is appropriate for this time of year. And I know people kind of sometimes don't love the media, but this is where I think the media serves a really important purpose in the world of sports. I think we need to set up realistic expectations for Georgia for the upcoming year. Georgia, after all, is the reigning national champion, but a sport like college football, where there are 14 different teams in the SEC with wildly different circumstances surrounding them, there are 130 teams to play FBS football. Not everybody defines success the same way. What would be very successful for one program is simply not successful for another. And, given what's out there for Georgia, its comparison to other teams nationally, its, recent track record of success, what does success look like for Georgia? What should UGA fans be happy with? What would be less than that for Georgia? We'll do some of that with Mike Griffith here coming up in just a little bit. Also, we do a golden shoe at the end of every show. Just kind of a fun way to kind of close the show out. It's a way to make fun of Florida a little bit there too. Today, though, is going to be a little bit different in that, based on some of the stuff I'm seeing online, today's golden shoe is actually a little bit of a conversation starter. It's actually creating a little bit of a debate among some Georgia fans. This is kind of silly, but still really fun. So we'll do that before the show is done today there as well. A very funny golden shoe that also spurs a bit of a debate among dog fans. I'll tell you more about that before we're done on the program there as well. But before any of that, let's go around the doghouse. And speaking of silly, Kirby Smart was on the receiving end of a silly prank yesterday. We don't do a ton of video-only stuff around here because out of respect for our radio and podcast audience. But this is a little bit of a video-centric type thing just for a moment. Smart was at the Chick-fil-A, I think it's called the Chick-fil-A Challenge or whatever. It's like a golf tournament with some, key figures, football coaches, things like that, as a way of supporting some of the charities connected to the Chick-fil-A kickoff game, which Georgia's a part of this year, and obviously the Peach Bowl, which is a national semifinal college football playoff game. By the way, before we move on, let's not forget that this year, Georgia's got something to play for, that it always does, but in terms of the college football playoff, a chance to play well enough to give itself what essentially counts as a home game for the college football playoff, playing potentially in Atlanta as the 1 seed if it could get there. That's a pretty big mission potentially on tap for UGA, but that's also a different conversation, maybe a different day. But they have a golf tournament each and every year. It's always like Reynolds Plantation, Reynolds Golf Complex there a little bit. And I guess there's a prank they kind of do each and every year where somebody ends up hitting kind of a trick golf ball and the golf ball kind of explodes. Yesterday, Kirby Smart was the example of that. If you're watching on video, I'll show this to you for a moment. And, if you're not, I'll put a link to this later on. The whole point here is this, maybe kind of a little bit of corny prank or whatever else. But the fact that I think deep down we probably know that Kirby Smart only likes this kind of stuff only half so much, right? I mean, I think Smart is good at kind of relaxing and enjoying himself on the golf course this time of year a little bit. He lets his hair down as much as he's ever going to. But there's still an element of, knowing he's being videoed, knowing he has to kind of cooperate with stuff like this, that I'm sure this is probably the last place that Kirby Smart wishes that he could be. But swing doesn't look too bad. Honestly, it actually looks pretty good for Kirby Smart right there. So always happy to see him settling in and enjoying himself on the golf course there, and some kind of funny stuff from the Chick-fil-A folks a little bit yesterday on that there as well. Obviously, all of that going to raise money for a great cause. We love the way that golf supports the charitable endeavors, both for college football and everything else, and certainly that's an example of that there too. So good stuff from Kirby yesterday on that. Something else we're going to get into before the show is done today. There is a lot of, and we told you, related to the Jordan Addison thing from Pitt and the stuff that's been going on at Miami, there is a little bit of a shift, I believe, in the mood around transfer portal and name, image, and likeness. I told you that earlier this week, and maybe more evidence of that today based on what's been reported, of course, the last 24 hours. Now, can anything be done about it? That's a fair question, but are people wishing they could do something about it? Seems pretty obvious that's the case. So we'll do that before we are done on the program. But for now, aftermath of a historic draft for UGA and what comes next, let's talk to our good friend Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
It was fun being on board the Independence of the Seas with Mike Griffith last week, and it's great to be with him here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today. Mike, we watched the first round together on Thursday. You covered the rest of the draft throughout the weekend. It's obviously an event that you really enjoy, I think. There's 1,000 different ways you can chop this up. Let me just kind of go big picture to begin. What was your original takeaway or just kind of initial thought on such a prolific haul for the Dogs there?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It was a wow moment. I mean, seeing the fifth guy in the first round go off the board was a wow moment, and you just felt really good for those guys that had worked so hard, and you were so happy that the seniors who came back, Jordan and Kobe, Quay, you were glad to see the payoff, right? And good to see Trayvon Walker go number one. I mean, that's another feather in Kirby Smart's cap. And, as I've said, to me, some people will debate this, I know, but I think this NFL draft was really big for Kirby, even bigger than the national championship when it comes to recruiting, because kids come to school, let's face it, they want to major in football, they want to be picked. And not only do you produce a record draft, Brandon, but with, Trayvon going number one, it just sends the message like, hey, you don't need to be holding up an individual award. You don't need to be a all first team, all SEC. You don't need to have 20 sacks. You just need to do your job and buy in, and NFL teams will notice.
Well, what I've said about this, Mike, is obviously what you just described is good for Georgia, but I also think as someone who is admittedly a college football fanatic, that this is good for college football there as well because, and I'm not quite so sure why this is true, but the correlation between pro success and team success in college just exists for the sport of football in a way that it doesn't for, like, say, college basketball, where Kentucky has elite NBA prospects each and every year, but they really haven't won anything of note in a good number of years. That for some reason, I don't know why this is, but having a bunch of pros on your team at the college basketball level doesn't equate to team success the way that it does in college football. That the cool thing about college football, whether it be Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or anywhere else, is you don't have to ask a player, hey, do you want to play on NFL Sundays or you want to give your all to your college team? You don't have to ask them to make that choice. Working to be the best pro prospect you can be also helps your team as well. And if you've got enough of those future NFL stars who are budding and who are emerging, then the team is going to win. In fact, if you don't have those guys, you don't have enough talent to even get through the door there on that. It's kind of a cool correlation that exists in college football that for whatever reason just doesn't really exist in college basketball.
Yeah, I think maybe I'd point to the one and done deal with basketball. Maybe part of the reason why is, these kids aren't really in a program that long. I think there is something to be said, though, for the esprit de corps and the locker room, the intangibles, right? And I think football is a lot more of a developmental game, and
I do too.
It's obviously more of a team sport. I mean, basketball, there's a lot of one-on-one, and I don't want to say the players aren't skilled, but, you can practice basketball on your own. Football, you got to work with other guys. It's very much a team sport. And as we've seen Georgia the last few years with their elite defense, everybody has to do their job, right? Everybody has to have that gap integrity. I know you like that term, Brent. Everybody's got to have that gap integrity. So, and who's able to do that? Who's able to be assignment cell, right? And who's able to, be properly, I mean, there's a lot to it. And, it's kind of cool hearing the Eagles fans getting excited to have Jordan and Kobe, because they recognize that they really have the two leaders off the defense. And they're already looking to these guys for leadership. You don't often hear teams say, oh, we're going to get some leadership out of these. These guys are rookies, and yet they're going to be looked upon as guys that are going to be expected to go in there and help galvanize what I believe will be a rapidly improved Eagles defense.
So is there you mentioned the Eagles guys there, obviously Kobe, who went later than some folks thought he would, Jordan Davis. in the first round. Is there a Georgia player where you really like his fit with the NFL team that took him? Is there somebody that you think is set up well for success based on who he was drafted by?
Yeah, I'm really excited for Lewis Seen.
Okay.
I really fell in love with Lewis even more at the combine. Just hearing Lewis talk, and he talked about pressure, Brandon. And I guess this is part of the Kirby Smart mindset. But I thought Lewis articulated it really well. He said, a lot of people look at pressure as a negative. He said, I see it as a positive. He said, I look forward to it. Because I know I'm prepared for it. And he said, all pressure is it means somebody expects that you're going to do it. And he likes that feeling. This is a great story. I mean, this is a kid who immigrated from Haiti to Florida and then lived up in Massachusetts and Boston for years and then loved football so much he moved to Texas to finish his career so he could be recruited. Comes to Georgia, gets pressed into action in that final bowl game where he's a little undersized. The next year he shows up 15 pounds heavier. One of the more devastating, and it was a clean hit on Kyle Pitts. Pitts dug into it if you go back and watch it. But just he hits like a train, and yet he's cerebral enough to be great in coverage. He's got a daughter that he plays for. Just like everything about the Lewis Seen story strikes me that this guy's going to be a future All-Pro. And I think he's going to fit well in the Minnesota Vikings. They've got a nice culture there. And I think he's going to fit really well up there. I like him there. I like Quay Walker. Quay's one of those guys with some ceiling. I mean, look, N'Kobe is the most accomplished guy. There's no doubt he was the most accomplished. But as you pointed out, it's not just about what you accomplished in college, right? There's a little bit about what your ceiling. And you see a guy that's 6'4", 241 and runs as fast as Nick Chubb and DeAndre Baker in the 40. Give me some of that. And that's Quay Walker. So you see some of these guys that I think are on the verge of popping, of standing out. I'm a little disappointed. Now, George Pickens, I kind of have an A and B here. On the one hand, I like that he's playing for Mike Tomlin. I could see it at Pro Day. Mike Tomlin was there really eyeing him up. I said he was going to get picked in the second round if he was there by the Steelers. He did. But I saw Tomlin talking to Pickens' parents. That was kind of a tell for me. And I watched how he watched George. One of those, get someone who looks at you like that. I think you've even hit me with that a couple times on Twitter, Brent. But Tomlin had that look in his eye at Pickens. But here's the thing I don't like. He's not going to have anybody to throw to him. If Pickens goes to the Packers, Aaron Rodgers makes him Rookie of the Year. But Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, I'm just not convinced that is going to be the best fit for George Pickens as a rookie.
Yeah, I sort of think I get what you're saying about the lack of quarterback there, but I do think that of the specific fits, Pickens in Pittsburgh is one of the ones I probably like as much as anything because I think that Steelers fans are going to respond well to the way in which Pickens plays the game. That's obviously a tough, hard-nosed town. Pickens, who's not what I think of as a prima donna wide receiver, that's a guy who kind of plays with a little bit of an edge to him. If I had to guess, I think that Steelers fans are going to really enjoy Pickens' playing personality. I think he's a good fit for what I think of as the city there in Western PA.
No, I'm with you on that, no doubt. I mean, I did a radio interview, and I mean, my goodness, you would have thought we were talking about Jake Fromm and Justin Fields on Twitter the way it blew up. I mean, the fans are so into George, and they're worried about his character. And look, he did some silly things, okay? Squirting somebody with a water bottle and getting into a fisticuffs after some guy punched him in the jaw. Okay, those were immature things. But, it's not like George was getting in trouble. And that's not who he is. I mean, we saw the interviews with him. We've got it on DawgNation. We streamed it live on DawgNation. You want to know who George Pickens is? Watch his combine video on our DawgNation YouTube channel. I mean, this is an articulate, bright kid. He just has this unbridled enthusiasm that at times, you got to calm him down. But it also works for him. Remember Eric Stokes telling us, BA, about how crazy he was in practice, trying to play this guy in practice. Like it's like, dude, this is he's the anti-Allen Iverson, right? I mean, he's always going 100. And I think to your point, I think that does excite the Steeler fans. I just really hope that they can get him the ball, that they can find somebody that can put it on him. Because we've seen how dynamic he can be, whether it was with Jake Fromm catching 11 passes in one half against Baylor or the finish to the 2020 season with JT. Last year was kind of tough. He was injured, so we don't really know. But we've seen how dynamic this guy can be when he's 100%, and he's getting some balls put on him.
I want to talk to you a little bit about expectations for Georgia for the upcoming season. You're on the Feinbaum Show this week, and listen, I've been on that show before. You know how it is when somebody kind of pulls out something you say and you kind of get blasted out, and you're like, wait, did I really say that? So I'm not so much worried about the specific text of whatever was discussed, but I do think setting proper expectations is an important conversation for people like us to have going into a season like this. I just think it sort of frames the year very well. And, Mike, I do think that Georgia in 2022 should be shooting for more than just winning the SEC East. And listen, maybe Georgia doesn't get there. I mean, obviously the thing about expectations is sometimes you don't meet them. But to say the SEC East alone would represent success for UGA, I don't believe that's true in most years. I especially don't believe that's true this particular year, regardless of the fact that Georgia just lost a lot of talent off its team. What would you say in response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And you're referring to, a snippet of me saying it would be miraculous. But I was saying that in the context of the reload that Kirby Smart has on his hands. There's never been a team ever in history that's lost 15 NFL draft picks in 1 year. And if we're being honest about it, it's really almost like 16 because Adam Anderson was a first-round pick. And he played 2/3 of the season, including the Florida game. He was very instrumental in some of those early games. So, and then you add to it, BA. You add to it that other teams that lost all that, they didn't have to deal with transfer portal losses either. I mean, Jalen Kimber's a guy that I think would have started opposite Keely Ringo. Jermaine Burton, he would have been one of the top 2 or 3 receivers, if not the top. So, you lose 2. JT Daniels, I don't know if he starts or if he doesn't start. Let's not have that discussion. But at the very least, you have 2 starting quarterbacks or 2 guys with experience if one goes down, and which one has the last 2 years. And you've had another guy there. You don't have that backup. So it's not just losing 15 guys, experienced Amir Speed, Justin Robinson. This is valuable depth. These are key pieces. If, listen to the Alabama fans, whine all off season about not having good depth. You've lost some pieces because of the portal. In addition to 16 NFL players, if we're going to, count the loss of Adam Anderson. So that's an unprecedented toll. Now, Georgia has recruited extremely well. We know the names of the backups, many of them with 5 stars behind their name in recruiting, but they haven't done it yet at that level. And meanwhile, the rest of the East is better, I believe, right? Will Levis is being talked about as a top 15 draft pick quarterback. Hendon Hooker led the SEC last season in pass efficiency in his first year in Josh Heupel's offense, and they just landed another transfer in Brew McCoy. In South Carolina, I don't know if Spencer Rattler will pan out, but I know that a year ago he was the Heisman Trophy favorite. So I think the East teams are going to be a little bit better, and I do think it's inevitable when you lose 5 first-round picks that you're going to drop off. And I would just reflect back on last year. Alabama, Florida. Dan Mullen's been fired, but he darn near beat Alabama. In September, right? So all I'm saying is if Georgia does, and I do pick them to win the East, to be clear, but let's call it what it is. It is miraculous that Kirby Smart can recruit and develop that fast that he could have, you've got to call this the biggest rebuilding job in recent college football history because nobody else has lost as many players. That he could have the biggest rebuild in modern era college football history and go back to the SEC championship game in this day and age in the SEC with transfer portal. To me, that warrants a miraculous compliment, which is what I was trying to say. And I guess I didn't quite say it well enough.
Well, like I said, the specific text of a tweet's not that interesting to me, but the conversation I do think is worth having here. And what my response would be on this, Mike, is of the 6 national champions in the playoff era, 4 of them have returned to the playoff the following year. So from that standpoint, it has been more likely than not that champions go back to the playoff again next year, which to me is what success would be for Georgia. Being back in that playoff discussion, having a chance to win the national championship again. I don't think, if Georgia falls short of the national championship, I'm not necessarily going to call the season a failure. But if Georgia's watching the playoff on TV, that to me feels like less than what Georgia should be doing. And as far as like the guys that Georgia has to replace, while 15 may be a modern record, the truth is all the national champions in recent memory have had 5 or 6 first-round draft picks. So the level of top-end talent that Georgia's replacing isn't actually as all that different compared to Bama from the 2020 team, or LSU from the 2019 team, which admittedly kind of fell off, or Clemson from the 2018 team, or Ohio State kind of before that. That these national champions all have the same number of first round picks, and most of them find a way to get back to the playoff again the following year.
Yeah, I'd kind of throw Clemson out because they're in the ACC and their path is a little bit easier. But to your point, Alabama has done it successfully. LSU not so much. 5-5 and 6-7, and 7 guys picked. They still had talent too. I just don't think it's quite as automatic as people want to make it. And I could be wrong. Maybe Georgia will waltz through the SEC East as dominant as ever. But last year they had a benefit of a defense that was only giving up 6.9 points per game through the regular season. That was as good as anybody's been since 1986 Oklahoma, Brandon. So I don't think the offense has the benefit of 2 or 3 quarters to get warmed up. And I don't think it's going to have the same benefit of the field position, not just because the dominant defense is gone, but also I feel like that Jake Camarda is going to be a guy, and maybe the Australian comes in and picks up where Jake left off. But, you're talking about one of the premium kickoff guys. I think only 15% of his kicks were even returned. And one of the premium punt guys who would regularly flip field position. You just got to shrug it off. You punt from your own 20. The other team starts from their own 20. We just shrug. Well, normally the other team's starting from the 45 or 50. So I think there's some hidden yardage that's missing. And I think that defense, that dominant defense, with the way they were able to force 3 and outs. Think about the Florida game. We're all sitting there 3-0 with 3 minutes left in the first half against Florida. And what happens? The dominant defense strikes, right? Is that going to be there this year? There are still some great players, but not the depth and not the experience that we saw last year. So that's my only point.
Sure.
Again, I think Georgia will play in the SEC championship game, but I'm going to give Kirby Smart full credit if that happens. I'm not just going to say he's supposed to win, because he's now not just dealing with the number of record draft picks. He's also dealing with the transfer portal, and that's something that a lot of these other teams didn't have to deal with, the proliferation of transfers. I mean, Georgia lost 8 guys that'd be playing football for them next year. 8. And 2 or 3 of them were starters on top of the 15 or 16 NFL prototype players. Now, the good news, even though there's no transfers coming in this year, is he kind of got a delayed impact, right? Tyke Smith, who we thought was going to be an impact player last year, this year he will be, the West Virginia Hawks. Eric Gilbert, who we thought could be an impact player, this year he will be. So, the transfer portal taketh, but it kind of gives back with Tyke and Eric. Now, one thing we haven't talked about, and I guess we just all assume it'll all work out great, is Georgia lost 40% of their coaching staff. We have to see how Stacey Searles does. We think he's going to do fine. He's been here a couple times before, right? We have to see how the new defensive, how Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp call the defense with Dan Lanning moving on, right? And we have to see how the new DB coach from Rutgers works out. We have to see how BMAC works out. There's a lot of new. 40% of your staff is gone. Think about it. Half of your team is gone, half of your starters, and almost half of your coaching staff. I just can't rubber stamp the return. And if they make the return, then I'm going to give them full credit.
Mike, interesting stuff. Thanks for being here on the program today. We'll look forward to getting a chance to chat with you soon. Obviously, you've had a lot of very interesting takes post-NFL draft, and we'll continue to read those there as well. Thanks for being on hand, and we'll talk soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Have a miraculous day, PA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So in the notion of miraculous, which is the word that I guess Mike used on TV that got some attention, I joked with him on the phone this morning that in his version of the Bible, Jesus would use the loaves and fishes to feed 5 people. If you're defining miraculous as winning the SEC East, because honestly, I do believe the expectations should be, bigger than that for Georgia this season. Now maybe they don't get there, but that's the starting expectations. That's kind of what they should be. And I thought that was a good conversation with Mike there about that. And ultimately, let me give you one more thought about this quickly, and then we'll move on and do something else. And you've heard me say this before. Over the course of the last 15 years, there have been 3 teams in the SEC which won national championships that totally fell apart after that. LSU after 2019, Auburn after 2010, Florida after the 2008 national championship there as well. They came back, won the East again the following year, but Urban Meyer was out of a job by the end of the 2010 season. He was moving on. Now, what do all 3 of those, I'm going to call them collapses, LSU and Auburn, certainly Florida for the most part, was a bit of a collapse there as well that's kind of lingered now for a good number of years. What do all three of those collapses have in common? These were all programs that were built around generational dynamic quarterbacks. Clearly, Auburn post-Cam Newton was never the same again. LSU post-Joe Burrow, and by the way, Joe Brady as his passing game coordinator for that year, never the same again there either. Remember, Florida post-Tim Tebow really hasn't found that quarterback for the most part that matched what Tebow did for them. These were all programs that built national championships around that kind of singular figure, that quarterback. By comparison, and this is a compliment to Georgia, by comparison, Georgia's just a much more decentralized program. Georgia is not, its success was not built on any one player. Great on defense, but no one player was more responsible for that than the others. Georgia scoring about 40 points per game offensively. Brock Bowers was the best player on that offense, but there was a lot going on for UGA on both sides of the ball. And that's why I think it's more likely that Georgia kind of puts itself in the category of teams like Clemson, Alabama, which found a way to be back in the playoff year after year, than a team like LSU, which was kind of one and done and never really heard from again, because so much of that LSU success was built on the back of one player, Joe Burrow, helping them get there. Georgia just doesn't have any one player who's that responsible for its success, and that's part of what made 2021 so special, and part of what makes that success more easily replicated as you head towards 2022 there as well. Let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And by the way, don't forget about the really fun things going on at Royal Caribbean. Mike and I had a great time on our cruise last week. For those of you who were on board with us on Independence of the Seas, we appreciate that. And it's a great reminder to you that now is a great time to kind of start planning your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation this summer. Ships all over the place, having a great time. Or as you head towards 2023 there as well, thinking about that too. The point is, the time to book right now. Get going here this summer and enjoy yourself. It's a great family experience. I know for me, my wife and I, we are just chomping at the bit to get our kids on board a Royal Caribbean cruise. They weren't able to go with us this past week, but they are looking forward to being going on one soon. One of the things we'll do a lot is, like you're watching this video right now, we'll sit around at home and watch a lot of these like Royal Caribbean videos of the cool stuff that you're doing at Perfect Day Coco Cay, or the really fun stuff like the Flow Rider, which is kind of like the wave simulator, surf simulator on the back of a lot of these ships, the various water slides on board. We'll watch a lot of these videos as a family, and my kids just get so, you imagine being a young kid, you're seeing all these videos. You're just so excited about being on board one of these ships. So I think it's great whether you're a couple that just wants that getaway. My wife and I had one of those together in February. Or if you're a family looking forward to taking advantage of all the amenities on board, or the great ports that Royal Caribbean visits, whatever your story is, there's a way for you to enjoy a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. My friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can help get you booked up here. It's tcava.com. That's the website for the Cruise and Vacation Authority, tcava.com, or 770-952-8300. 770-952-8300. That is the phone number. All right, I want to do kind of one story for the SEC through today, cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. That's related to the NIL stuff. Tomorrow, we'll probably get more into like the Brew McCoy thing, things like that. He transferred to Tennessee. We'll do more of that tomorrow. But I want to focus on something that Ross Dellinger has written at Sports Illustrated here for a moment. So we told you there have been two very big stories involving NIL as of late, transfer portal as of late, that seem to have created what I kind of view as a little bit of a shift change. The language is just different than it was a couple of weeks ago. There is angst that didn't really exist a couple of weeks ago. Now, sometimes it's not always reflected on social media, where a lot of folks just get their cheerleading outfit on, their pom-poms, and they just root for every radical change they can find. But in terms of like real people having a real conversation, there are some real concerns about the direction that college sports might be heading. Some of this is related to Miami, and actually the most recent example has been basketball, where John Ruiz, a very outspoken booster, kind of bragged about a huge six-figure NIL deal, winning a transfer for the Miami basketball program. There were rumblings, and honestly, I don't know how true this even really was, but there were rumblings about a player on the roster hearing about this through his agent, which is just gross to a lot of people to think about a college athlete having an agent. Not everyone feels that way, some do, but through his agent saying he wanted to renegotiate his NIL deal because of what Ruiz had bragged about paying another player. And this kind of turned into like a weird kind of online squabble between player agent, NIL booster. There's a degree to which that just feels like too uncharted of territory for certain people. And then there was the story, as we've been telling you about Jordan Addison, the Pitt wide receiver who did officially enter the transfer portal yesterday after rumors had popped up a couple of days ago that he was going to transfer to USC, this before he actually entered the portal. There had been talk of big NIL deal. Colin Cowherd reported it to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million. I told you before, I don't really believe any of these really gigantic seven-figure numbers for the most part. I think a lot of that gets exaggerated. But nonetheless, if it's not $3 million, it's probably still a very big figure of money. And so that's kind of created this thing of, what do we want? USC tampering with the Biletnikoff winner off the Pitt roster? Do we want Miami booster openly bragging about, acquiring transfers because of NIL deals? Some people say they don't. So this is what Ross Dellinger has written in Sports Illustrated. The headline, Task Force to Big Money Boosters. NIL sanctions could be coming. And so what he basically, goes on to write here, and this is a very deep, detailed story that's worth you reading. You can read it for free at sportsillustrated.com, si.com. But basically, this is the attempt of the NCAA, I guess, to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube after things have gotten as wild as they've gotten. One official with knowledge of the guidelines that the task force is going to suggest says, we've let things get out of hand. We have to get the boosters out of contacting recruits and bartering with them. Now, I don't know how you do that. I really don't. And some people are going to say, well, it's not like boosters just started bartering with players in 2022. They've been doing that for decades. Look, maybe they have. I mean, obviously, everybody seems to think they know, what's happened in the past and, what's going on. And we're not naive around here either. But here's the point. That whatever the under-the-table market used to be pretty clearly worked. It pretty clearly functioned logically, right? I mean, that whatever's happening now, the response to all of that, I think, is what's so different. The fact that it's creating a level of hysteria now that didn't exist for whatever decades of Eric Dickerson getting Trans Ams or whatever else, Fred Taylor saying whatever it is that he said, or all this other stuff that we can all tell the stories of what we've heard, and people love sitting around the campfire and talking about these kinds of things. But whatever that under the table thing was in the past, at least was orderly, right? And it was at least one of those things that it could be kind of kept quiet. Honestly, it was way more dignified than whatever this garbage is right now, I would say. Now, I don't know how you go back and fix this after the fact. I really don't. But it's interesting to me that according to Dellinger, who I respect as much as anybody, he says that that's what they're going to try to do here a little bit. I mean, it's a very big story. It's a very detailed story. I'll read a little bit more here. Dellinger writes that the real challenge for the NCAA is controlling an issue that is governed by laws in at least 30 states, potentially offering protection to boosters and collectives in their involvement with recruiting. One more quote here. This is going back to Greg Sankey. He says, in recruiting, we have inducements created, which was a concern all along. This is going back to earlier this spring. He says, you've seen the stories. I don't know how many have been actually verified. Now people have time and creativity and motivation to fully explore NIL, and it's very uncomfortable in college athletics. But as long as it's compliant with state law, it seems those activities can take place. So, I mean, even a key decision maker like Sankey seems to be somewhat perplexed about what to do next. But here's the one thing I'll say. Is that we are not powerless. By we, I mean those of us who care about college football. I'm not a decision maker, but I'm obviously a little bit of a stakeholder in all this. I care about this the same way that you do. Those of us who do care about college sports, we are not powerless to do something about this. We are not powerless to shape the world as we like for it to be. And it is not old man sitting on the porch yelling at a cloud to say, hey, what has happened with, a guy like Addison being pried off a roster, or what has happened with Miami with, John Ruiz openly bragging about, the level of anarchy he's helped create. It's not old man on the porch to say, boy, this is not really quite what college sports has been for decades and decades, more than a century. It's made it so popular. I'm not talking about paying players. Actually, I don't really care that much about paying players. But what I do dislike is the fact that the booster like Ruiz at Miami or whoever it is, that, behind the scenes here at USC, I don't like the idea that we're empowering them to such a great degree in college sports right now. Adding them as a figure that's almost as important as the coach, the conference administrator. That all of a sudden now we're saying, hey, key booster is just as powerful in the grand scheme of things as these other guys would be. You've heard me say this before, but whoever pays the employees owns the company. Look at your paycheck. The guy who signs that paycheck, the person who signs that paycheck, that's your boss. Are we really ready to empower a lot of these, sort of, I would say, somewhat shady, somewhat shadowy boosters to be the boss over college sports? And you can say, well, that's the way that it's always been. I don't know. I don't know that's quite as to quite as such a degree here. What seems to be happening right now is clearly a little bit more chaotic than whatever's happened in the past. You can have your issues with the previous era of college football, under the table, whatever else. But at the very least, that was orderly. What we have now certainly seems to be a level of disorder that some people are suggesting that they are unhappy with. So interesting stuff from Ross Dellinger there at Sports Illustrated. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I'm going to have some fun with Georgia football here in a moment. A Georgia assistant coach has a reason to brag. We'll get to that here in just a bit. Before that, though, a lot of you know, as we head towards Mother's Day on Sunday, and by the way, Mother's Day is Sunday, so make sure you get your plans ready to go on that. But we are also honoring and celebrating our championship moms, courtesy of Kroger here over the course of the next few days. I love telling you these stories. We told a great story yesterday. I want to tell another great story here today. Really great to honor our championship mom for today. Her name is Jennifer Yarborough. And the email goes like this. I'd like to thank you for what you're doing by giving us an opportunity to celebrate our wives as the wonderful mothers they are. He goes on to tell us Jennifer's story here. I've been married for 15 years, got 4 children. I get up every morning at 3:50 a.m. to go to work. That's super early. Wow. Other than for 2 weeks when each child was born, she has made sure to be up with me at 3:50 to make my lunch and my breakfast, as well as get back up with the kids to make their breakfast a couple of hours later. After making their breakfast, then she switches hats and becomes their teacher. We homeschool. Every Wednesday, Sunday, and one Friday every month, she works at our church as the preschool director. She carries our kids with her to church every single time and teaches them how to serve behind the scenes. She's pretty much the mother to every kid at our church and in some ways our community. There are not many places we can go locally where someone's child doesn't run up to her and give her a big hug and a kiss. And then she comes home, makes supper for everyone while using vegetables that she's grown in our garden. That's amazing. It's like a superwoman. With our children that she's also can there as well. She coordinates opportunities for our family to serve in the community. She keeps the house and all of our clothes clean. I could go on, but I'll stop there. He says, the Lord's blessed us, this family, with the greatest mother ever. Jennifer Yarborough certainly sounds like that. How about that great photo of a good-looking dog family right there? And I'm telling you right now, I love this time of year. I love celebrating these championship moms because here's what we know. Like behind Georgia football, the thing we all love and care about, man, there are a lot of very happy families who use this as one of their great sources of entertainment, things like that. And, we are big believers in all that here. Kroger loves celebrating these championship moms. So please make sure you check out your local Kroger to get ready for Mother's Day. Kroger.com/Mother's Day is a place you can go to kind of, learn about all the great things that Kroger's got for your flowers, your gift cards, your, whatever else, the stuff you need for a great meal if you're going to cook that this weekend. But it's especially just kind of fun here to celebrate these championship moms, to give them a great collection of gift cards, well-earned, of course, and a great package of prizes here. We're going to keep doing this all week long. It is just really fun to be celebrating these championship moms, courtesy of Kroger. So thank you to Kroger for allowing us to do that and allowing us to tell these stories here on the show. And congratulations to Jennifer Yarborough for being our winner here today. That is really, really awesome. Something else that's really awesome, a lot of the Georgia assistant coaches have had reason to brag post-NFL draft, maybe none more so than Todd Hartley, who's on quite a run as of late. Hartley, as he should, taking a bow on social media lately. Let me show you what Todd put out on Twitter here post-NFL draft. I actually didn't know this. He says that John Fitzpatrick getting drafted by the Falcons means a tight end's been drafted from the University of Georgia for the 4th consecutive draft. He says the first time in school history. Also, it's the only school in the country that can say that, a tight end drafted in each of the last 4 drafts. He says, tight end tough. I like that. That's kind of a cool statement all the way around. And obviously what makes that fun for Hartley is that you assume that the best is yet to come for Georgia at that position, that that Georgia's really redefining itself in many ways as a program for tight ends, guys that it's put in the National Football League, Fitzpatrick included. We had John Fitzpatrick on the show last week. So much fun to hear about his preparation for the NFL draft, and I did have a little bit of a chance to interact with John after being drafted by the Falcons. He was over the moon about being taken by his hometown team. Because remember this, John not only played at Georgia high school there at Marist, that's an Atlanta family through and through. And Justin Schaefer much the same way. When you go to Atlanta area high school, when you play at the University of Georgia, you get picked up by the Atlanta Falcons. To think that you could play your entire football career in the entire state, we'll see what happens, years from now. But up to this point in time, like, that's really cool. And the Fitzpatricks are thrilled about, John being there with Atlanta. And obviously, Todd Hartley thrilled about the fact that his guys are having so much success. And when you listen to John on our show last week, when John looks at the talent that's still there at that tight end room after he moves on, it's pretty clear that he thinks the best is still yet to come. I loved John Fitzpatrick talking about the talent that Hartley has collected there at UGA and the way in which Todd gets the most out of those guys. This was really good from John Fitzpatrick last week. Take a listen to this.
It's incredible seeing the talent in that room. It's 5 guys, 6 guys deep that all play and all can play. And I think it's hats off to Coach Hartley and Coach Smart, the way they recruit, the way they, bust their tails, flying all over the country, getting these top guys. And it's paying dividends, obviously. But, no, it's special, and it's pretty cool because there's so many different personalities, so many different talents, and Coach Hartley finds a way to make sure that we all complement each other. We can all play on the field at the same time and use our different skill sets to find success.
So I think there's something really neat about the success that Hartley's enjoying because the position that he recruits is somewhat unique in that, Georgia's going to recruit a gazillion defensive backs each and every year. Other positions, linebacker, offensive line, kind of the same thing. You're just collecting multiple guys at each position. For the most part, though, Georgia's going to be going after like 1 or 2 tight ends only in most years. You just don't recruit a lot of guys at that position. So Hartley's shooting for the top of the food chain, the very best players available. He's winning with a lot of those guys. But also he is taking what at one point in time in football been kind of viewed as a little bit of a nondescript position. And, he's kind of turned tight end into a little bit of a glamour role there at UGA. Think about Reed Gilbert here, who when he came to Georgia as a transfer kind of wanted to be a wide receiver, but now is kind of thought of as a tight end again. You don't hear any complaining about that because all of a sudden tight end's kind of the cool position at Georgia for a guy like Darnell Washington as well. Brock Bowers obviously helped redefine that. Oscar Delp there too, that Hartley has not only had great recruiting success, development success, as Fitzpatrick just talked about, but also kind of redefining what it even means to be a tight end. All of a sudden, this isn't just the kind of player stuck between an offensive lineman and a wide receiver. Suddenly, it's kind of its own special category. And I don't know. I think it's really fun how Hartley's kind of redefining what it means to be a tight end. And it's been great to watch the way that UGA fans have responded to all that because it's pretty obvious. Most Georgia fans want as many tight ends on the field on each play as they can possibly get because they know how much success that means to the Dogs. So I think it's really cool to see. Nice to have John Fitzpatrick on our show last week before he got drafted, and great to hear him say those nice things about Todd Hartley, and really fun to think about where the draft success for UGA tight ends goes from here because pretty clearly the best appears to be still yet to come. So I told you earlier, our golden shoe today has a little bit of a debate baked into it. Today's May the 4th. It's Star Wars Day. I do love Star Wars, so I love celebrating this. May the 4th be with you always. Our buddy Mad Dog shares a great graphic here in honor of all of that. The May the 4th Star Wars graphic, but it's Kirby Smart here, kind of the Anakin Skywalker, Luke's, Darth Vader type deal. Holding the Georgia football helmet. It's a great edit. Mad Dog's great at this, and it's perfect for today. But a couple of folks that responded to him on Twitter were like, or at least one person was like, I'm not quite so sure I like the idea of Georgia's the evil empire. See, I do kind of like that a little bit because, listen, you watch all the Star Wars movies, there have been a lot of them now. The good guys are always changing, but for the most part, the bad guys kind of stay the same, at least generally speaking. I like the idea of that kind of staying power. I could also stand to watch a Star Wars trilogy told from the perspective of the Empire because I feel like they probably have a side of their story that hasn't been told. Plus, I think you can probably debate about, how much Georgia really is kind of an evil empire right now in college football, given the fact that Georgia's not really leveraging things like name, image, likeness, and transfer portal as much as some other folks are. Either way, it's kind of a fun debate, but a great edit. Certainly a great May the 4th style edit there, so we'll give a golden shoe to Mad Dog. And, by the way, lousy, stinking Gators. How about 4,864 days since they have won a national championship? In the world of Star Wars, Florida will always be the Jar Jar Binks. A long title drought for them. And, of course, Gator Hater Countdown. Georgia beating them again, 178 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. May the force be with all of you here, there as well. Hope you're having a happy Star Wars day for all that observe. We'll take some of your comments, and somehow it's May and we're still doing shows that are like 6 hours long. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for being here. I'm going to go to YouTube first today. As of late, YouTube has just been arguing left and right, but we'll see if they are doing that again today. Slim Pickens says, if Jar Jar Binks is a good guy, I want to be a bad guy. Yeah, so I said this before. I don't know if they'll ever do this because I don't know that Star Wars has much of a sense of humor about stuff like this. But I would love to see, even if it's like an animated series, I'd like to see a trilogy told from the perspective of the Empire. Because, there is a certain level of, I don't know. The best thing about bad guys is, and like this is true in like wrestling too, like bad guys are good bad guys when they believe what they're doing is good, right? Like they believe what they're doing is for the right reasons. And like when you're a kid, you don't really think about that. All you think about is like, okay, it's obvious who the good guys are. It's obvious who the bad guys are. But as you get a little older, you start thinking more about this. That bad guys wouldn't be bad unless they believed what they were doing was good. And the Empire probably had to have some reasons for thinking what they were doing was good. I'd be interested to know what those were. Like I would absolutely. It's kind of like, I guess, like the Cobra Kai thing. When I was a kid, Cobra Kai was as evil as anything. But in the new series, it's kind of a flip of the script, right? All of a sudden, you're sort of telling the story from the perspective of Cobra Kai. I wouldn't mind hearing Star Wars from the perspective of the Empire. I think so. Scott Harris says BA is giving George Lucas more ideas to make money. George Lucas, though, is at this point in time, all he's doing is counting his money. This is that Disney bunch now, which, listen, I think that like Mandalorian, unbelievable. I thought Boba Fett was pretty good. Mandalorian, I think, is terrific. I'm really looking forward to the new Boba Fett series. It's almost like, as of late, it's like the series for Disney Plus have been better than the actual recent movies have been. Zebulon Owen says, I wonder how deep that wide receiver room really is. I don't know if he means Georgia there on that. I think we're about to find that out. As I've told you before, man, I want someone to emerge, whether it's another tight end or whether it's a receiver. I want somebody to emerge to give you a little bit this year of what Brock Bowers gave you last year. My hope is Brock Bowers has even better numbers this year than he had a year ago, but someone else emerging to give you that alongside Brock Bowers. And ultimately, that's what Georgia really needs. I thought Connor Riley made an interesting case yesterday for that being Kyrus Jackson stepping up into that. I thought that's kind of interesting. As maybe him being that guy, but one way or another, you need somebody to be that guy. And so from that depth, large number of players who it could be, having someone who actually emerges is really pretty important. Paul Moon says the best episodes were the ones with Mando of the Boba Fett series. Yeah, it almost seemed like that's kind of what it became, right? The Boba Fett series kind of became an extenuation of the Mandalorian story. I do like that a lot. Mike 3883 says Darth Maul has a good story in the Clone Wars. So like, I am not as much of a Star Wars expert as some people are. I love Star Wars, but there are plenty of people who know more about like the Star Wars galaxy than I do. I was very disappointed to find out that Darth Maul was not going to be in the Boba Fett series. To me, bringing him back for that just seemed to make a lot of sense to me. The fact that he's not, I thought was a little bit frustrating. I have not seen the Clone Wars, the animated series, but I'd like to do that. Real Boss says Manning's going to come to Georgia. He's going to beat out Brock Vandagriff and Gunner. He says they're good, but Arch is plug-in ready. He says he's got that last name. So we'll see. I told you earlier that by process of elimination, I'm now fairly confident that that Manning's coming to UGA. Andrew Hughes says, do you believe that Carter's the best defensive player on the team? I believe that Jalen Carter is the best player on the team, regardless of position. At least right now, that's my belief. Jonathan Aaron says, with the success of the draft, if we do get Manning, just think about the classes we will put together over the next few years. Can you imagine all the 5 stars and high 4 stars we're going to get? Yeah, it's kind of like my point off the top of the show. That's sort of the final frontier for UGA, that great quarterback. And maybe Arch Manning, there's a chance Arch Manning comes to Georgia and he's still not quite that great quarterback, yet. But my bet is on Georgia eventually having a quarterback that's just as good as all the other players, all the other positions. Like, why would it not be? And when that's the case, there is the possibility that Georgia runs off and hides here. And obviously I got the Georgia shirt on, so maybe this is what you'd expect a Georgia person to say. But the chances of Georgia building a dynasty, multiple national championships, I would believe is statistically greater than the chances that it never wins another national championship again. Some teams do. They win one, they don't win another. Ohio State won the first college football playoff national championship, haven't won one since then. LSU won one in 2019. It's going to disappear from the national landscape since then. I think the chances of Georgia being kind of one and done here are far less than the notion they're about to build something that's, where we look back on the 2021 year, the 2022 draft, as just the start of all of this. I think that there's evidence to suggest that outcome more likely than the one and done type scenario, and eventually attracting that quarterback, I believe, is going to be a big part of this. Maybe it's a guy that's currently on the roster, maybe it's a guy that's on his way, but more likely than not, eventually Georgia gets that. I've told you before. You look at Nick Saban in Alabama, first 9 recruiting classes, really only recruited one quarterback who was capable of being a starter. That was A.J. McCarron. But around his 10th class, that's when Jalen Hurts comes. And then Tua Tagovailoa comes the year after that. And then, obviously it's the emergence of Mac Jones from the class of 2017, but then Bryce Young after that. That the fortunes for Alabama quarterback changed after about 10 years on the job there for Nick Saban. It's a similar timeline worth observing for Kirby, who's nowhere near, that level of experience yet at UGA. Let's see what else. Scott Harris says, not sure how long Kirby can keep up this pace. It's way different than when Saban started his run. I think that's true. That there is a level of challenge that exists now because of how the transfer portal might be used against you, how the NIL stuff could potentially be used against you. But, y'all, and this is not, I'm not Kirby Smart's agent here. It's not my job to carry his water. He can do that for himself. But pay attention to this here a little bit. This is another example of Smart potentially moving a little slower and having that work to its advantage, work to the program's advantage. We are at a time in which a lot of coaches live in fear of tampering and programs using NIL to steal players off their roster. Well, somebody tried to do that with Georgia this year, and Demarius Mims didn't work. Mims went there, looked around, and said, this isn't for me. We'll never know how much money he was being offered, but we know he was being offered something. At least we have plenty of reason to believe that. And he's like, I don't care how much money I'm getting, at least based on the offer that was out there. This is just not really where I want to be. I want to be at Georgia. That yes, the presence of NIL, the presence of transfer portal, the way in which it's being leveraged right now does threaten Georgia's stability. But thus far in this offseason, the year after winning a national championship, Georgia's handling that. And, Georgia's slow embrace of NIL, they've obviously embraced it some. There are plenty of Georgia players who are cashing in through the Players Lounge or some of the marketing deals that guys like Brock Bowers have and others. There's a collective that's been established there now too. Georgia is embracing NIL. They are not embracing it as fast maybe as other places. And suddenly that also kind of starts to make some sense there as well. If there's going to be a little bit of a reset on kind of what NIL means for a program like Tennessee, which is kind of, totally sold out to NIL style recruiting, that could be a problem. Or a Miami that's kind of, seemingly kind of sold out to NIL style recruiting. Like they've empowered John Ruiz to essentially be the full face of their recruiting efforts. good luck with all of that if all of a sudden, the NCAA redefines some of this kind of stuff. Once again, Smart's more measured approach starts to make some sense. It's not all that different than when the entire world, Nick Saban included, were falling all over themselves of, hey, finesse football. You got to score 100 points a game. Doesn't matter how bad your defense is. Doesn't matter how deficient your running game is. You've got to throw it, and score a million points. Kirby is a little slower on that. And the rest of the sport last year looked a little bit more like Kirby than it did some of those more finesse-oriented coaches, much the same way that Nick Saban's kind of become. Let's see what else. Let's go over to Facebook here for a moment. Give me just 1 second to pop up over there. On Facebook, and then we're going to get ready to go here in a few minutes. Steve Highland's got 4 national championships coming in the next 5 seasons. Now, listen, if that be the case, that's a very bold prediction. I think that you'd be talking about, one of the great runs of all time, if that's the case. Bill Sanders says, as Ernie Johnson always said, the great former Braves broadcaster, winning is the best promotion. Yeah, for sure that's the case. Keith Fold says, Kirby's building Georgia the right way. We are in it for the long haul. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a Georgia fan. I like the idea of Georgia winning, and I cheer for that to happen. But there's also a part of me that's kind of, a little bit more process-oriented. And I'm pretty fascinated by the mechanism by which Georgia does what it does. And I have to say that I am pretty impressed by that. That I do think that there's something to be said about the staying power, with which Georgia's kind of building itself. And listen, there's a part of it, some of y'all know I'm not fully on board with some of this NIL and transfer portal type stuff. And there's a part of me that does, I'm also not completely against it either, but if you had to kind of put me in one category, I'm more against than for. You certainly would say that. There's also a part of me that kind of likes the idea that Georgia stands as a little bit of a rebuke against all that. Georgia they've had some transfers out of the program, but they haven't had a million. Georgia's also not building its roster off transfers the way that Alabama kind of is. I think it's very interesting that the reigning national champion, Georgia, the nation's number one recruit, Arch Manning, are, seemingly on a little bit of a collision course right now. And NIL is not really a part of that discussion at all. Maybe he's got some huge deal coming. I don't know. But it's just amazing how drama-free that recruitment is. Manning doesn't like drama. Georgia doesn't like drama. And if my prediction earlier was right that Manning's coming to UGA, I think it's interesting in an era of, open bidding wars and bragging about, shadowy booster figures who are essentially, buying the roster. That just doesn't seem to be as big a part of what Georgia's doing. I kind of find that interesting. Carson Beck, James Hightower says Carson Beck is our Mac Jones. He's not going anywhere, and I feel he will shine when his numbers call. Brock Vandegrift, he says maybe Bryce Ramsey. I don't know about that, but I have said before that I would use the story of Mac Jones as a reminder to any player. Like, if you look at the transfer portal, the quarterbacks that have transferred, how many players have really benefited from transferring? I think the number actually may be a little lower than you might think. That this thought of, well, I'm a great player. This current program doesn't seem to know that, so I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to have the world at my fingertips. Like, look at Jaden Daniels at LSU. Daniels was at Arizona State. He transferred. It's not even obvious he's going to start at LSU. And you have a lot of those stories of, TJ Finley leaving LSU to go to Auburn, or even Zach Calzada leaving Texas A&M to go to Auburn. Like, there's a chance Robbie Ashford may win that quarterback job there. At least some chance anyway. The point is that part of my issue with the transfer portal is that it ends up being sold as a bill of goods to the players who transfer. They have this magical thinking that changing their location is going to change their outcome, and oftentimes that's not the case. But for guys who have chosen to stick it out, it's not just Mac Jones. Mac Jones is the best example because of how successful that he was, but as much as it pains me to admit, Isn't Kyle Trask kind of an example of that too? Trask waited at Florida. When he finally got a chance to play in 2020, he had a really great season. Listen, I don't take pleasure in saying that, but Trask, you got to say he had a good year for the Gators in 2020. That's a guy who just stuck it out, buried on the depth chart, eventually emerged, and when he did emerge, he made the most of his opportunity. What is he, the backup in Tampa Bay now? Is that right? I don't know. But the point is that he had a big season in college by waiting. That staying with the program where you are comfortable with the offense, where you know what's happening there, that may be over the long haul your best path for success than rolling the dice, transferring to a new program where everything is new, where you're forced to learn everything fresh. The chance to do that at a place where you're comfortable may just be a better path. Now, there's no guarantee that Beck ends up being as successful as Mac Jones was at Alabama, but it is an interesting comp worth paying attention to. If I was a dad of a player, I believe I might be talking about that, whether it's Georgia or not. That look at the guys who've had success by staying, compare those to the guys who transferred looking for success somewhere else. Randy Hall says, how many defensive linemen draft over the next couple of years? Boy, that's interesting to think about. Obviously you look at Jalen Carter going very high in next year's draft, but you start thinking about so guys like Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse, how much do they introduce themselves to college football next year? How much do they add to that depth story for UGA? Jordan Davis told us a lot about Zion Logue too. 3 guys being taken in the first round is going to be hard to ever replicate, but I still think that Georgia's probably the best defensive line in the country in 2022. I have a hard time imagining a defensive line being better. Matt Rukavina says, don't let this change the fact that Trask is in Tampa and that Franks and Beans, meaning Felipe Franks, is the backup for the Falcons. Let's see what else. Mike Stricker says that Trask was not on the active roster in any game last year with the Tampa Bay Bucks. So there you go. Christopher White says Joe Burrow is the only player that's dramatically increased his status after transferring. He certainly, if he stays to Ohio State, he probably does not go on to have the success that he had. Now, I don't know how. Like how is a guy that good kind of buried on a depth chart? But transferring seemed to really work out well for Burrow. It's one of those really crazy stories. So there are obviously going to be some of those examples. Of course there are. But, man, there are a lot of examples of guys transferring and finding out that the world's not any easier in their new school than it was their old school. Mike Stricker says, I saw a mock top 10, Carter at 2, Ringo at 4, Nolan at 7. Is that really right? That's crazy. I think that, look, I love Nolan Smith. I think he could be in line for a great season at Georgia. Nolan's going to have some big questions to address as far as his size goes. There are going to be a lot of people who think Nolan's a little bit small to be an edge rusher type guy in the NFL. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm honestly not smart enough to tell you that. But I am smart enough to tell you that's what the conversation around Nolan's going to be. So we'll see. We will see. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Hassan says the Air Dogs are coming soon. Listen, Georgia threw the ball about 100 times more last year than it did in 2017. This is clearly a team that's already throwing it more and throwing it better than it has in the past. When you add that to what I think, because of a better offensive line, could be a more potent rushing attack this year, that's how you get to, the number that I've called for is, can Georgia average 42 points per game? To me, that's the kind of the next threshold here. Can it kind of get up above that 42 number? That puts you about in line with what Clemson was in 2018. I think 42 points could also come pretty close to leading the country in scoring next year as well, which I don't think is an unreasonable goal for UGA. Randy Hall says we need a 1,000-yard receiver and rusher to hush the critics. Maybe that's the case. Charles Womack says, I think that Georgia has more experience than one thinks. I recall a presser where Kirby Smart mentioned how many players on defense had over 100 meaningful snaps. I don't think That included cleanup duty, which happened in most games. Yeah, I mean, look, Georgia plays a lot of players, and when you're one of the players who thinks you should be playing more, that's kind of frustrating. But when you're a guy like, we used Zion Logue before. Like, Logue's been in some games. He's got some experience for UGA. And all of a sudden, that becomes a stair step towards progress here for this upcoming year. A lot of guys in that same situation. Georgia plays 20-something freshmen in most years. Georgia it plays a lot of guys. I mean, it plays 30-something players on defense. It plays, multitude of, offensive players on a rotational basis, especially at wide receiver and running back. I mean, it just does a lot of that. Paul Holcomb says Kirby's philosophy is perfect for the SEC and the nation. Football the way it's supposed to be played. Yeah, Paul, I mean, I don't mind telling you I hope it works. Not only because I like the idea of Georgia winning games, although obviously I do, but I like the idea of college football being college football. I do. I like the idea of college athletics existing, which I hope can be true for my lifetime. And, to me, there's a big difference when Kirby Smart talks about some of this kind of stuff and when Nick Saban talks about some of this kind of stuff. Like when Saban complains about NIL, to me, it has the sound of arguing on behalf of what benefits him in Alabama. In other words, Saban complains about so-called pay for play, but that kind of comes across as it's just making it hard for me to get players at Alabama. There's an element to which, and maybe this is what you would expect me to say, but still, there's an element to which when Smart talks about some of this kind of stuff, it almost sounds like he's speaking above his own circumstances and talking a little bit about the sport overall, what's best for the sport. I mean, the one thing I think even critics of Kirby would have to say is, as a guy that does love the game, I mean, he willingly, voluntarily spends a lot of time with high school coaches, even coaches that don't necessarily have players that can play for him right now. You ask the coaches around the state, Kirby's not a stranger to them. He loves the game. At the grassroots level, he loves the game. And I do think that Smart wants the game to thrive. And we need guys like that, not just arguing on whatever benefits them right now, but what's just good for the sport in general. Randy Glass says NFL draft success is the key to getting players to the transfer portal. It certainly doesn't hurt. It certainly does not hurt. When you can show that track record of here's what guys do here, that's certainly the case. It's also, I would say, Randy, a key to not having a lot of space for transfers either. Because, listen, 85-man roster can get pretty crowded pretty quick. And if you're showing an ability to get a bunch of guys to the NFL, guys who are on that roster are not necessarily looking to leave very much either. And that's very important. Charles Womack says, saw an article giving Coach Scott some heavy praise. Yeah, Trey Scott deserves it. Trey Scott has proven himself to be a very, very successful assistant coach. You got to have those kind of guys. Alan B says, the 2019 LSU offense against the 2020 Alabama offense versus the 2021 UGA, who do you have? So if you take Georgia out of this for a moment and say it's simply going to be 2019 LSU versus 2020 Alabama, I'll take 2019 LSU, and I'll tell you why. They had to prove it in loud stadiums on the road in a normal year. Alabama was great offensively in 2020, but nobody was playing defense in 2020. It was a pandemic year. No one was practicing. Teams weren't really meeting face-to-face. That was the kind of year where a prolific offense like Alabama was in position to exploit some of the weaknesses that existed in the sport. So in terms of greatest offenses that we've seen, does 2020 Alabama compare with 2019 LSU? I'll take the LSU team because they did what they did in a normal season. They also won at Alabama. So from that standpoint, I'll take that as the best team that I've seen. Would the 2021 Georgia defense be in position to stop those teams? I mean, I believe that the 2021 Georgia defense would stand up against almost anything. I really do. I do. I mean, look, to me, and I'll admit I'm playing catch up on this, but given the way the draft concluded for Georgia, I think you do have to put them in the category of I mean, it seems like every national champion in recent years has kind of gone quickly into the category of historic level team. But, I mean, 2019 LSU was for the most part, viewed as a historic level team. Some people thought the 2020 Alabama team much the same way. I think that Georgia 2021 is now a part of the historic category of recent national champions on the list of all-time great teams. I do. I probably did not necessarily think that at one point in time during the season, but looking back on it all, I think they're probably there. Randy Glass also asking if Arch Manning is a dog, will that impact wide receiver recruiting? I definitely think that it will. I think it could impact wide receiver. I think it could impact a running back. I mean, that's the cool thing about these great quarterback recruits is they do typically have coattails. And I do believe that Manning would have some of those for Georgia. All right, quick final spin to the rest of the comments on the other platforms, but we got to get ready to go. All right. Christopher White says the LSU 2019 was the craziest offense I've seen. Yeah, I'd probably take it over anything else. Croaking 123 says adversity that came after the Bama fans. I guess it's a little bit of a response to somebody else. Let me see if I can find one more good YouTube comment here. They're talking about Mac Jones over here. Paul Moon says Javon Bullard was playing well at Star during G-Day, and Starks has all the potential in the world. Basically, the story of our defense, young but enormously talented. Yeah, so if you give me of those incoming freshmen, guys like Starks at safety and, all that great collection of cornerbacks, including a guy like Julian Humphrey, who I think could really be heard from in an interesting way. I think the idea is amongst that large number of players, I think it's very likely that you have a breakout from that group. Whether it's a safety, whether it's a cornerback, we'll see. But, whether it's Dalen Everett or Humphrey or, whatever else, that I think of that freshman category of defensive backs, one guy really stepping to the forefront, I think it's more likely than not. So that's kind of a fun thing to think about. Hey, thanks for being here on our R.S. Andrews Cool Down today. Y'all make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. All kinds of interesting stuff going on with the Braves. It is not great news right now. I was very excited when they took game one of their series against the Mets last night, 2 nights ago, but doubleheader yesterday, lost both ends of that. So that is not great news. But there is other kind of fun stuff going on. And all kinds of good stuff there. Obviously, the politics stuff is pretty hot right now, so you can read that online at ajc.com. So check all that out. And also some great coming up, some sort of, those of you like good food and drink around the Atlanta area, some big events coming up. You can read about that as you head towards the weekend as well. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com. Also, big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews. It's been warm. Was it 80-something degrees yesterday? My air conditioning is working overtime because big guys like me love the AC. So if you're worried about yours not making it through the spring and then the summer, boy, it's going to be working overtime then. Go ahead and get some peace of mind. Get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. Back here tomorrow, 9:45, 1st and 15. 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all the other platforms as well. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll talk to you then, everybody.